Johns Hopkins Medicine.
Known for groundbreaking research, teaching, and medical care.
Hello, and welcome to Johns Hopkins Medicine Facebook Live. I'm Dr. Aaron Millstone, and I'm a pediatric infectious disease specialist at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center in Baltimore, Maryland. It's the start of the school year, and today we're going to talk about how kids can safely return to class amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I'm joined by two of my colleagues. First, a friend, Dr. Alison Agwu, who is also a pediatric specialist at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center, and she is also an adult infectious disease specialist at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And also, we're pleased to have Dr. Jennifer Katzenstein, Director of Psychology, Neuropsychology, and Social Work, and co-director of the Center for Behavioral Health at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you both so much for being here this morning. We're really happy to have you.
It's my pleasure to be
Thanks
here,
so much
Aaron.
for having us.
Great.
Please call me Allison.
Okay.
And you can call me Jen.
Aaron, great. Okay. It's been 18 months since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's first talk about COVID, the virus. We've come a long way in understanding the virus that causes COVID-19. Dr. Agwu, Allison, do you want to tell us a little bit about how COVID presents in children?
Yeah. So I think, definitely COVID can present with fevers. Kids can have chills, they can have muscle aches, they may have cough or runny nose, they can be extremely fatigued, there can be nausea, vomiting, there can be diarrhea. The excessive fatigue, I think, is worth mentioning. That tends to be a really profound one. Reminder to people that COVID can be asymptomatic in kids, but those are the symptoms we often see when they do present. Headaches is another one I may have left out.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's important for parents to remember that there are a lot of symptoms, and these symptoms not only can be indicative of COVID, but they also overlap with a lot of other common respiratory viruses that we start to see circulating this time of year.
Definitely.
So as kids are going back to school or have recently gone back to school, it's essential for them to go because we know that in-person learning provides more hands-on education, greater clarity and understanding for students. But this year, it's also going to be important that we curb the spread and transmission of this virus in schools. So Allison, what would you recommend for families to think about as good strategies to protect their kid and prevent the spread of COVID in schools?
Yeah. So I think, this goes for the spread of COVID. It also goes for the spread of the flu and other things, the respiratory viruses that we always talk about year to year. In terms of preventing COVID in schools, I think certainly if your child is 12 years of age and older, the vaccine is probably number one, number two, number three, get your child vaccinated. I think secondly, it's the things we oftentimes say. Wash your hands, hand hygiene, really critical. Cover your sneeze is another one, but more importantly, if you've got a sneeze, don't send your child to school. This is not the medicate your child and hope you get by and get them into school so that you can get to work, even though I know that's challenging. Presenteeism is an issue, and so keep your child at home if they are sick and quarantine them to avoid them spreading COVID and other viruses.
And then what are you telling families about masking in school?
Oh my goodness. I left out the biggest one. So mask, and more mask. And I think even if masks are not being required, really masking, in schools and out of school to protect yourself, particularly if, in indoor spaces, et cetera, you can't guarantee the distancing. Many schools are putting in, distancing within the desk, the lunch, et cetera, and emphasizing the importance of your school doesn't have that, of mask and distancing and making sure we're being safe to your schools to do that. Most are, and talking to your kids about abiding by those rules in terms of the mask and distancing.
Thanks. Those are great points. And I would emphasize the masking because what we've learned over time is that masks really do help kids stay in school. Not only are they going to prevent the spread of the COVID virus this year, but they also, what we learned last year is they help prevent the spread of other respiratory viruses like influenza, the common cold, even the illnesses that give kids vomiting and diarrhea in the winter. And
Correct.
all those other viruses cause equally disruptive for families. So not only will masks help curb COVID spread, but hopefully they'll keep kids healthy this winter and in school. Great. So what do you recommend parents should do if their child does become sick this winter?
So, I recommend that if your child becomes sick, first, as I said earlier, don't send them to school. I think it's always important, particularly important this year with COVID. So don't send them to school. It's the normal things that you do in terms of hydration, et cetera, and keeping kids, hydrated and watching what's going on. And if they progress or get worse, seeing your doctor to make sure that they're okay, testing, et cetera. But really, it's don't send them to school if they're sick. Cover your sneeze, be careful, are sort of the things that we always say, but again, really critical this year with COVID.
Yeah, that's great advice. I know one of the common questions I get is about what should be that threshold for parents to seek attention and go to their doctor. And I always tell parents, if you're worried, it's always okay to check in with your doctor. I mean, there's no harm in calling, scheduling an appointment, and getting checked out. This year, when kids have symptoms, it's equally important for them, as you said, to get tested, because we really need to know if kids have COVID so that we can appropriately keep them away from their family members and other students to keep the community safe.
Absolutely.
Are there any particular times where you're telling parents to call that they should be worried, and not like, if it's always safe to call the doctor, but when are times when you would really encourage them to call the doctor?
Yes, certainly. I think, some of the symptoms I mentioned in terms of cough, et cetera, fever, et cetera, we expect a lot of that. But what you're looking for, hoping not to see, is your child being listless, not responding the way they should. They're coughing so much they can't catch their breath. They're turning blue. The fever is not breaking. They are any mental status changes, any diarrhea or nausea to the point they're not tolerating food. These are excessive findings. And I don't want you to say, oh, well, Dr. Agu said those symptoms are part of COVID and we should ride this out. No, those are COVID. While most kids do great with COVID in terms of the mortality rates and hospitalization rates for kids are low, kids can get sick with COVID and the extremes can have poor outcomes. So err on the side if you're concerned and your child is not bouncing back in 3 to 5 days or so that we oftentimes give the viruses to run their course. Please do reach out to your doctor and don't use this, well, it's COVID, I'll keep them away, and keep them at home. It's really critical.
Allison, thank you. You have been really a great voice for both keeping kids safe and advocating for masks and vaccines, and we really appreciate what you're doing for the local community and now a broader community, so thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Next I want to ask Dr. Katzenstein a question as a mental health expert. So for many children and teens, this school year is going to be the first time they're going back to school in over a year. How do you think this will affect kids emotionally and mentally?
Yeah. There's a range of emotions as kids return to school, especially after virtual school for the length of time they may have been in virtual school. One of those may be relief, returning to the school setting, returning to their social interactions with peers, and a more sustained social and school presence over time. But there also may be anxiety and worry about returning to school, the demands of the school day, those social interactions, if they were negative in the past or if there was bullying before. And in addition, what I'm seeing, especially for our middle schoolers, is more uncertainty and anxiety, especially now that they're changing classes and more responsible for the organizational demands of the day and making sure that they have the appropriate textbook and homework for those classes. So for some of the kids going back to school, there's a big jump developmentally that can be causing anxiety and stress as well.
Yeah. Please, Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to add to that because I have one of those 6th graders going into middle school, and surprisingly, he is so anxious about getting COVID. And I think we underscore that, right? We don't understand. Yeah, he's truly anxious about getting COVID himself. Given that his older sister's vaccinated, he could not be. And so, appreciating that I think is really important.
That's a great point, too, because it is now being back. We've talked for so long about being at home and keeping each other safe and physically distancing and wearing our masks, and now we're telling our kids to return to the setting with masks in place and with physical distancing, we hope, and lots of hand washing. But absolutely, that's a great point, because that is causing stress as well. They're being put into a social situation, and us as adults experience some of that anxiety going back into those social interactions too.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Absolutely. So, Alice and I are both parents. Tell us, what are you encouraging parents to do to kind of make that transition easier for their kids?
And I'm a parent too. I have a 4-year-old, and so Florida down here has been a little bit different. We've been back to school for a few weeks, and so for kids going back into school, we really want to make sure that they have been prepared with all of, as you mentioned, Allison, having your mask, maybe a backup mask with you, hand sanitizer and some wipes if that helps as well. As we go back into school, especially if there's a major transition in organization, getting into the school as much as we can, walking our schedule, going through our locker, making sure that those preparatory factors that we can put into place, we know, meeting teachers whenever we can, and then starting to really allocate time each day where you sit with your child and listen. And as parents, that can be really hard because we want to ask all the questions about the day and we want to find out what's been going on. But if we can start spending 5 or 10 minutes each day sitting with our child, asking how the day went, and then not filling that silence with more words, but rather just sitting and listening so that they can share with us how they're feeling. And making sure that we know that. How are you feeling about returning to school? If you do experience anxiety or you start to get stressed, what are going to be our coping strategies? And so making sure that they have that plan. If they find themselves getting anxious or stressed in class, maybe someone at school isn't wearing a mask, how are they going to address that? So having those open communications with your school and with your kids are so important.
Yeah, there are lots. Thank you. That's great, and there are lots of challenges and lots of questions. And I want to turn to one that we just got about masking. That we're getting lots of very practical questions from parents. I think we're all wondering like, what practical things should we do? So one of them is, I send my kid to school in a mask every day. Do I need to wash that mask? How often should I wash that mask? Allison, any input on how often you would encourage parents to wash their masks?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one I grappled with a lot with a kid with a mouthful of braces and a lot of spit, right? So, so one of the things I say, certainly, if the mask is visibly soiled, change the mask, right? So I send him to school with a mask and a backup mask, and masks can be pricey or time to wash, etc. But if it's physically soiled, you do need to change the mask. Or if it's wet or soaked with saliva, what have you, change the mask. So having a backup mask in his bag and an extra backup mask, and the schools all have masks, I think is I would aim to change it. I do at least a couple times a week. But if you use the mask 2 days in a row, it's great, it's fine. If it's physically soiled, you should change it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I always joke with my kids, when you start to see the food on the inside, it's a must change. That's a little more of a just kind of basic. One of the other things people wonder about is that mask going to spread COVID, and do we need to clean it to actually kill any potential virus that's there? And I mean, when we look back on the pandemic and what we've learned over the last year, initially there was a lot of concern about what the environment or how the environment contributed to the spread of COVID. And if my mask is getting contaminated, then I need to take it off and clean it and wash it with some frequency. What we have learned over time is that the environment is not playing as great of a role in the spread of COVID. It is more about direct interaction with people. So I think it's less likely that kids are going to come home, they're going to touch their mask. When they take it off, they're going to then contaminate their mouth when they have their snack. So I think the need to wash masks or change masks a couple times a day because you're worried it's going to be contaminated with COVID, I think our concern about that has dropped lower now. And right now, as Allison said, it's become more of a hygiene thing. When you see the Dorito crumbs or something else, like time to wash the mask. I do think, Allison, you also brought up a very important point, which is it's great to send your kids to school with an extra mask, because when they drop it in the dirt at recess, if they want to have a backup that they can go to.
Aaron, one thing I wanted to add to that, though, in terms of mask, is making sure your kid has a mask that actually fits them okay, right? So, with now that we're a year and a half, but almost 2 years in the pandemic, there's so many different kinds of masks, adjustable masks, and so taking the time to actually find a brand or it kind of works well for your kid, that's comfortable, doesn't is made of a material that's breathable, that they can work with, and then buying all those that you can find so they have many to change, right?
Yeah. Right. Another great question about what's the best type of mask. Do we need to put our kid in a KN95? Can we use a cloth mask? And I think a lot of what we've learned is that a well-fitting mask is really what we need. We need people to be wearing well-fitting masks, and the type of mask may be less important. But the mask as a barrier is what's most important.
Correct.
I want to go back to Dr. Katzenstein for a minute about some of the additional mental health concerns, because I do know parents are asking questions about when should they be concerned. So you gave us some nice strategies for what they can do to help that transition, but when should they get concerned and seek help either from a school counselor or from their physician or provider or a mental health expert?
That's a great question. It varies, of course, across the age range when we're talking about our younger kids, maybe preschoolers, heading into kindergarten. If we're starting to see any regression in behavior, more tantrums, more worry, more difficulties with separation from their parents, in addition, any changes in sleep or any changes in toileting. Really an important time, like you said, to seek out a school counselor, seek out a therapist, or talking with your pediatrician about different options as well. As we head into school age, we're really looking more to, again, that expressed anxiety in terms of potential school avoidance, more disruptive behaviors, being more easily set off or more easily irritated, or not engaging in previously enjoyed activities, not going out to do the same activities they used to do or be with the same friends that they used to enjoy. And then for our adolescents and high schoolers, one of the primary signs of anxiety and depression is irritability. And that can be a tough one because teenagers tend to be more irritable in general. But as you're talking with your teenagers, if they are easily set off, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, we want to be watching for that, as well as any hopelessness, the worry, the nervousness, depression, and again, changes in sleep, appetite, or previously enjoyed activities. Definitely time to be seeking out additional help.
Great points. So I hear you saying that I can't blame all my teenagers' irritability on the pandemic.
No, some of that just comes with being a teenager, and that's where it's a little bit of a slippery slope, right? Because, you know, there's irritability that comes with being autonomous and independent teenager, but then we know there's irritability that can underlie depression and anxiety too. So when it's really impacting their ability to function in their daily life, to have successful relationships or attend school or work, definitely time to seek out additional support.
Great, thank you. And the last thing I would end with is there are, and kids are frustrated because they feel like things are being taken away from them. And I keep telling parents that as parents are creative and resilient, and we can find fun things for our kids to do even in this pandemic. And we did that last year. So even in this fourth wave, even as we go through the winter, I mean, parents really need to set a positive tone for their kids and say, we can find fun and safe things for you to do. Put your mask on, get your vaccine. And if we're smart, we can continue to let kids enjoy kind of day-to-day stuff and going back to school. So I just want to thank you both so much, Dr. Agwu and Dr. Katzenstein, for talking with us today. This has been really fun, and we really appreciate you sharing your insight and experience about this topic with us. And we want to thank people that tuned in. We hope you enjoyed it, and we encourage you to follow Johns Hopkins Medicine here on Facebook and other social media platforms. To learn more about COVID-19, please go to hopkinsmedicine.org/coronavirus. Thanks again. Stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask, and get the vaccine when you can. Thanks.